Okay, so we've got a fresh empty model in Onshape, and we're going to design a universal spool holder. So the first thing that we might want to do here is to specify some sizes. Now the spool holder is going to be a threaded design which connects one end to the other and which traps the middle of the spool onto effectively a rod, a threaded rod, which then can sit on something else, possibly bearings in the center. So the first thing we've got to think about is the center hole. How big is the hole in the center of the reel? I'm just going to put that in as 85. Okay, now actually I'm going to give a name to this, so that's going to be the base diameter. So creating a variable, and this is going to be 85 millimeters. And let's create a couple of other variables. So we're going to have a hole in the middle to take a bearing. Bearings are typically using the skateboard bearings 22 millimeters. So let's just make something called bearing size or bearing OD. And pretty much everything else should flow from that. Let's see how we get on. Okay, so first thing that I've done is rotate the model, the 3D space, so that we're looking at the top. So I can click on the top, press N to normalize to be looking directly down on the top. And I'm going to create a sketch here in the top plane, and we'll start by creating a circle. And I'm going to type in for that. In fact, I'm going to pick up the dimension, and we'll click to make this a dimension, and I'm going to make this hash to be a variable, and I'm going to pick the base diameter. Okay, so now that gives me something which is 85 millimeters in size. And what you'll see here is that if I change that size, so if I increase it, I'm going to use the arrow keys here, this thing will actually grow. It's very easy to adjust that size at any stage in the design, or later if you print out this design and figure out that it's not quite right. I'm also going to have a slight what's the word for it? We're going to extrude this circle and then chamfer the edge of it in order to give us a profile which can fit multiple spool sizes. So I'm going to pick that sketch, and I'm going to use the extrude tool, and we'll just start by extruding this, say 15 millimeters. You'll see what I'm doing in a minute with this. And I'm then going to shave some of the top off this using the chamfer tool. I'm just going to give it a bit of a nice look, essentially. We can do two different distances here. So I'm going to chamfer this edge, and right now that's just using 5 each. And we again can use the arrow keys here to increase the numbers until we get the sort of design that we're looking for. We can tweak this a bit further at a later stage. Let's go for something like that, and then I'm going to create an additional chamfer on the edge, just to make it look nice. So we'll chamfer this. I'll create again two different distances, and we'll go for something like that, say. So that just gives us something to hold on to, and which will allow us to screw this in until it fits on the inner diameter or the outer diameter of the hole inside the center of the spool. I could model that as well, but I'll forget that for a minute. Okay, so from here then, the next thing we need to think about, I'm going to click this surface and create a sketch on there. The next thing to think about is the fact that we're going to have a bearing. Now most bearings, as I say, we use a skateboard bearing, that's 22 millimeters. I'm going to add a bit of size to this using this offset tool, because if it's 22 millimeters, I don't want to make it 22 millimeters exactly, or when it prints it won't quite fit. So I'm going to add 0.15, or let's say 0.125 all the way around, just to give it a bit of just to allow the bearing to be easily inserted. As I say, if I make it 22, then I'll probably end up having to get sandpaper and square it away. I've just found out with experience that you need to make the hole a little bit bigger than the thing that you're trying to fit. I generally recommend 0.3 if you want to have something fit inside, but we want quite a tight fit, so I'm going to go for 0.25, and so if I add 0.125 each side, that's going to give me my 0.25. Hopefully that wasn't too difficult to follow. Okay, and then on top of that we're going to create some extra offset in order to create a rod that we could thread. So on top of that, let's say we add 3 mil. And then I'm going to take this and we're going to extrude this. And now the question is, how thick is my spool? Now bear in mind, the spool is not going to touch this base here. It's going to touch somewhere along here depending upon the size of the spool. So thinking about that, is going to control how much we need to extrude this. I'm going to say 100 mil. You can adjust this again. So there's another thing that we could actually create a variable for called real width. So let's say I'm going to put that one as 100 mil. If I move this variable up, then I'll be able to use that in here. So instead of saying 100 mil here, I can change that to hash real width. Okay, so now again, if I want to adjust my design, I can make this shorter or longer. Very easy to do. Take that back to up to 100. Okay, and you can see now we could adjust that chamfer a little bit further here to butt this up to that edge. Perfect. And at some point it's going to get difficult to make that. So that looks as if that's about spot on. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is to add a thread to this. Now that you can do that from first principles, or you can pick up some tools. So you can add some custom features here, and you can search in here for thread. We'll probably find a threading feature. There are a few different ones that different people have designed. I've already picked one here, so this is called Thread Creator. So I'm going to click that, and it says which face to thread, and it's this outside edge that I want to thread. So I just click that cylinder and it will thread it for me. Just takes a moment. This is all being done on in the cloud somewhere on Onshape's servers. being very quick at all. I wonder why. Okay, there you go. You can see we've got our thread, and that's that's just too fine. We don't need a thread that fine. It would take forever to wind our bolt or our nut onto this bolt. So I'm actually going to change the pitch to 4mm, and that will then change this to be something that'll be a bit easier to use and a bit easier to print. You could even change this further. We could go for 8, for example, but as you can see, that's had an unexpected effect where it's actually created a requirement to make the thread that has got rid of the interior, which is definitely not what we want. What about if we did 6? No, 6 is no good. 5. Yep, 5 would allow us to keep the interior, but it's probably extremely thin between these inner parts and this, so we'd have to, again, adjust our design if we wanted to have even larger threads. So I'll stick that back to 4, as I'm pretty sure that'll work well. We could increase the number of starts here as well. That would again adjust the design somewhat and would make it probably do up rather quicker. I'll just leave it at 1. You can play with that if you want. The other thing we can do here, which is interesting, is a start taper. Now you can see here that's just had an effect at the top, and that can also make it easier to actually thread this thing. I've used a 45-degree angle. Let's change this to 60. And let's just cut a little bit further off the top of that, and that'll make that even easier to push in. Okay, so that's that part. It should be easy to push our bearing in. Now you can see we've got a little problem here. We're not going to be able to get our bearing in the bottom. So what I'm going to do here is just select that hole at the bottom, and we'll extrude, but a remove sort of extrude instead of a additive extrude. Click OK, and that's it. We've now got a hole in the bottom. And again, if we just modify that, I'm going to add, say, 2mm chamfer in here. That'll make it a little bit easier. And in fact, on top of that, I think I'm going to add a 2mm fillet, just to allow us to push in our bearing relatively easily. We could do that at the top too, but I suspect we're going to begin to have a bit of trouble if we start filleting this. I'll just try adding a 1mm fillet here. Oh yeah, it will let me do that. Right. Okay, so we've got all that parameterized modeling in. We can just modify any of this now to adjust any of this. So if we want to change that base diameter, I can click on this, look at my final model, and I'm going to increase that base, and it will just adapt the whole model for that adjusted base size. If I want to make it 100, no problem. Easy. You can see some of the modeling doesn't quite follow exactly. We'd have to go and adjust some of the chamfering. You can go a bit crazy with adding variables, but this will still work nicely. I think we originally had that at 85, so let's go back to where we were. Okay, so that's the one side of the puzzle. now we need to solve the other side of the puzzle. And before we get started with that, I'm going to come back to my sketch where we defined what the outer diameter would finally be of our thread. So if I click here, we can see it tells us that the final diameter outside was 28.25. So we will want our nut to be 29.25 or 29.75 in order to give it a bit of an easy time threading on. If we make it the same size, again, the nature of printing is that the numbers aren't always accurate and you need a bit of freedom to rotate your nut on the bolt. So our size would be 28.25. We actually could have calculated that too from here, given that we knew what we would add to it. The 22 plus the 0.125 plus the 3. Well, actually that would have been 22 plus 2 times 3 plus 2 times 0.125 in order to get all the way to the outer diameter. Could have all been parameterized, but that's going too far. Okay, so let's say we're going to add 1.5 mil of free space, so we need to create our second piece. Now we can do that in a new part studio. It's the easiest way to do it, really. So that's our bolt. Let's rename that to bolt, and we'll rename our new part to nut. Okay, now nut's going to be designed pretty similar. We'll start by clicking the top plane, and we'll create a sketch, bearing in mind that number, some of those numbers that we were just using. We want this thing to look roughly like the original one, so I'll bring across the base diameter. I'll have to recreate that here. So let's call this base diameter, and we'll make this 85 mil again. And we've got the OD of the main pipe of the thread. As I said, I'm going to make this 29.75, something that should fit nice and easily. Okay, so now we're going to create a sketch on the top plane. We'll start again by creating a circle and making this hash base diameter size. Then we'll create our hole, and I'm going to make this hash thread. And then I kind of want to mimic what I did at the other end. I could have taken alternative steps here to be able to copy this thing through, but let's just have a look again what we did. We extruded it 15, and then we did a chamfer with 2811, something like that. So we're going to extrude this. Now I've got a hole already in it this time because of the way that I've designed it. 15, and we'll put our chamfer. Oops, that's the wrong one. Two distances, 28, 11. Okay, we also created a small chamfer here as well. Might as well have it look the same at both ends. This was 5 and 1. And we're just going to create a thread on that inner face. We need to make sure it's the same pitch. So I'm going to put 4 in there. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's our thread. Now, as you can see, well, actually you can't see, but again, experience tells me, even though we've added that chamfer at the top of the thread, it'll be easier if we create a bit of a hole here as well. I'll do that in a minute. The other thing is, just be easier to do this up if we just again modify our initial sketch a touch. I seem to have accidentally created 2 sketches here. Yeah, so let's bring this back. Okay, I'm just going to put a line either side of this so that it doesn't extrude quite so much. Pick any size point you like. I'm not going to be too precise about this. I'm going to mirror this. I don't know where to mirror it actually. Okay, let's not mirror it yet. Let's create another line here. I'm going to create this line as a construction, so it's not actually doing anything. It'll be right on the center, and then I'm going to mirror, using that construction, this. That puts it exactly on the other side. So when that's extruded now, it'll look like this. Not quite what I had in mind. Not at all. I suspect the problem there. Yeah. Okay, well that's obviously not going to be so cool if we do that. So let's do it a different way. Let's come back to my extrude, and I will extrude these extra parts initially to create this, but then at the end I'm going to come back to this. Let's re-show this sketch, and I'll pick these 2 outer edges and I'm going to extrude and remove those, but they need to go the other way. Okay, now I've got what I want. Cool. Okay, yeah, so about threading this on. In order to thread this on, we also need to remove a bit of material here to make this easy to use. So, the way to do this is to step to a point before the threading occurred. So I'm going to right click on this and say roll to here. That'll roll forward the design to the point where the threading started. So just before we create the thread, I'm going to create myself a new little tool. Okay, so we'll create a new, I'm going to create a new little tool here then on the right plane. So we'll draw a new sketch here, and I'm going to start by projecting onto this plane. Actually, let's make that a projection. Let's set Control Z to step back a little bit, and I'll make this a construction project that forward. So it doesn't have any bearing on the sketch, but it is present. I can use its size as a guide. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to create a... If I pick up this point here and then go along from it, you can see this construction line appears, this yellow line, so it creates something precisely on that point. So I'm going to click from here to here, and then down to here, and come back to here. Okay, now this will create me a triangle. You'll see why I want that triangle in a moment. I'm also going to create a new construction line which will give me an axis, and the reason I need all of that is because I'm going to take this design here and I'm going to revolve this around this axis. Okay, so that gives me a piece. Now, rather than adding that to this is just going to be a tool that I'm creating. Okay, and what we'll do now is roll to the end, and then I'm going to perform a Boolean operation to subtract this tool from this target, and that creates me that nice easy entryway, which makes it easy to thread. And there you have it. Okay, so we can finally just piece these two things together if we like. Insert the nut and the bolt. If we just want to sort of see how this thing will work, I would create cylindrical mate. I think you can actually create threaded mates here. A revolute mate. Let's just put this as a slider mate. So I'm going to create a center mate connector there. I'll just move this out of the way, and I'll create a new mate connector in the center of that, and then I'll okay, let's delete that. Okay, we need to create the mate, and then I will create this slider mate. I think this is how this works. So that to that, and we want it the other way up. Okay, there we go. So that's roughly how this thing will work. This thing will go up there. We'll have our reel captured in the middle, and we're done. Hope there was something useful in there. Have fun.